genetic pharmacologist, this would be a fine thing. I might elaborate on the answer, some of you who are not familiar with the premise. The reason I suggested that the mushroom might have been engineered and be in fact an artifact of an alien intelligence was number one, of course, the informational content of the trip. But number two, the fact that psilocybin is 4-phosphorylocyanine-dimethyltryptamine, the only 4-phosphorylated indole known to occur in nature. You know, out of thousands and thousands of compounds and organisms, only one 4-phosphorylated compound is known. So this suggests that it is artificial, or at least highly unusual. You know, they're all, every week, the Science magazines are full of talk of strategies for locating and identifying extraterrestrial life. Well, a very obvious, practical, and scientifically reasonable way to proceed would be to look at the DNA of various life forms on Earth and see if there are any where there is a wild statistical departure from the norm. And whenever you get an organism which is producing or has genes that no other organism has, this is highly suggestive, you know, because the evolutionary types evolve incrementally out of each other. So you would expect that there would be a relative smoothness in the expression of genetic products, but one fungus would be rather like its taxonomic near relative. One menosperm or member of the Rubiaceae would be chemically similar to another. In fact, of course, we do find subtle chemical variations, but the presence of a 4-phosphorylated indole in a fungus like that is very suggestive. And one of there's an interesting book by Cyril Punamkurama called Perspectives on the Problem of Extraterrestrial Communication. And he outlines there what he believes would be a general strategy for extraterrestrial contact that any kind of species would have to operate against if it were to seriously conduct a search through space. And the model has a ship which, at a certain distance from its origin planet, it must replicate itself. And then at a certain distance, replicate again. And then again, in order to keep the density of ships constant as the sphere of the area being explored expands, there have to be more and more of these ships. And these ships could be as small as a human, as an animal cell. They don't have to be thought of as Star Trek type ships. But the point is, this ship contains a message that you have to read and call in, because there are so many planets and star systems to be surveyed that the only way such a survey can be conducted is if there were a message in the ship qua organism, such that in the gene swarm of an alien planet, it would eventually be read by an organism on this planet, and that organism would act to do the things necessary to call the central switchboard, and then they would say, aha, we have contact in sector Alpha Sub-N 362, and they would concentrate all their attention there. The logical world that we assume to be natural may in fact be the artifacts of a much higher intelligence. Here.
Yes, would you speak on the timeline?
Oh, what a kind question. To lead me to my favorite subject. Well, it has to do with why you know, people do this for different reasons, why people take psychedelic plants and what lies behind it always. And what always lay behind it for me, from that very first DMT trip that I described to you at the beginning, was the notion, my God, this stuff has historical significance. It's really important, or nobody knows about this. Carrying with us a notion we are discovering. If we could bring it back somehow, it would change the world. Perhaps people are bringing it back by designing buildings and creating fashions or fashioning mathematical descriptions of reality. I never had that aspiration. I just simply defined myself as more humbly than that, as a consumer of ideology, as an intellectual who would learn what has been said and done and proposed. But after the DMT experience, I realized that there is unclaimed stuff out in those dimensions. You know, James Joyce says in Human's Wake, up in the nth prospector, you sprout all your worth and work your wings. Well, the key word is prospector. A prospector is a rock hunter. I wanted to prospect for the alchemical stone, for the lapis philosophorum, and I conceived it as an idea. And the timeline, I mean, I think it would come differently for each of us. For me, it was this incredibly formal, aesthetically symmetrical, and therefore satisfying idea about what time is. That the Tao is something which could be mathematically described as a flux of a quality in time, a quality that I named novelty. And once I had enunciated it for myself, I saw that that was the part of the world that we have no description for. We have, science gives us descriptions for what is possible, but we have no description for what, out of the set of the possible, undergoes the actual formality of occurring. Why are certain things selected to come to be? And I saw then the notion of the Tao, which is generally presented as a kind of intuitive notion. You're not supposed to demand too much hard-edged clarity. You say, flow with it, man. Flow with it. Well, when someone says flow to me, I think of equations, which would describe flow. Flow as a dynamical system, which therefore can be mathematically modeled. And what the timeline is a seeing that the very largest patterns which describe the whole birth, evolution, and death of the universe are repeated at successively shorter and shorter spans of time, and down into the quantum mechanically and microelectronically cognizable realms of time, the realm of the nano and the picosecond. And studying the I Ching, which I saw then as a kind of phenomenological description of time produced by the Oriental mind, completely unencumbered by our particular set of cultural conventions, certainly having its own set of peculiar conventions, but not ours, that there is a pattern in nature, not in three-dimensional space, but in time, a pattern in time on many levels that reproduces itself and can be known, can be formally described, and once known, can be seen to control the ebb and flow of connectedness, or the forward and backward surge of novelty. And I thought that this was a great insight since it was the only one I had, I could hardly sell it short. And what pleased me most about it was, you know, a rap is a rap. It's as good as the rapper. But here was a mathematically formal idea that could stand on its own, be examined in the absence of the rapper, be examined by critics who were as hostile as they cared to be. It's a tool. It's in a long line of tools that stretches back toward the first chipped flint and stretches forward toward the soul made manifest as starship and alchemical transformation. But it was the tool that I came upon, and they all, you know, what is always put against the psychedelic experience is they say, well, big deal, what's ever come out of it, you know? So I was pleased that here was a concrete notion that came out of it.
Yes, along the line of this time wave, can you give us a reading of our current time?
I would be only too happy to. The question is, would I care to prophesy based on this timeline? Yes, one of the assumptions built into the theory is that time is a series of nested resonances, and that each time is composed of resonance with previous and future times on varying levels. The time we are living through, I call the Roman twilight, simply because we are living through a period that is in resonance with the time of the last Roman emperor. And I think if you look at it carefully, you can begin to see the way this theory proposes to be analogical and yet formal at the same time. What was happening in the decades immediately preceding the fall of Rome? A progressively weakened series of self-indulgent propagandists ruled the greatest empire on earth with a more and more shaky hand as they succumb to gonorrhea, mercuric poisoning, various occult pursuits, millenarian obsessions, and so forth. Meanwhile, in the East, in Byzantium, a new civilization was unleashing itself. And if you think of those events which unfolded over a few hundred years as telescoped into a few years in our own era, you see that with the rise of Gorbachev and the continued mismanagement of the American empire under the crypto-fascist series of rotating bimbos and buffoons that we have suffered through. So what is happening is an empire is being betrayed into eclipse by self-indulgence and stupidity and bad management, and its cultural adversary is in ascendancy. Now, Byzantium never conquered Rome. It doesn't happen like that. But what ended was the Roman world of indulgent, cohesive imperialism. What it was replaced with was a rise in religious fundamentalism, a stricter and more Puritan kind of morality, the rise of epidemic diseases, and a vast economic retrenchment, which initiated what we call the Dark Ages. Now, in the present situation of the 20th century, these themes are being recapitulated at an extremely rapid rate. So their dark age is for us a tough 3 or 4 years, fortunately. You know, it said history occurs first as tragedy, then as farce. We are the heirs of the vast tragedy of extended history who lived through the curiously mediaized and dehumanized farce of the recapitulation of these themes, so that, you know, because the very notion that the last 10 Roman emperors could be symbolized by someone like the present chief executive cannot fail to bring a small smile to any open mind, I think. So what I see happening between, or over the next 24 years, really, is first this retrenchment, which, hell, it may be upon us, judging by the market performance Thursday and Friday. I may not be doing prophecy at all. It may be recast at this point. But whether that is a technical move or